Hello and welcome back to my channel. Um, this week, somebody said in one of the comments yesterday about carefree reading. That's what summer reading is to me, when you get some time off. And for me, it's these particular Puffin books. And going back to books that I seem to have owned for a long time, but these are ones I was storing up for these particular times. People I've read before, but these are kind of not obscure, but the kind of deeper dives into the oeuvres of these particular people. So I read Luc and Boston at the beginning of the week. That was yesterday and the day before. I seem to have read a lot quickly. And, carefree reading. But this was terrifying. It's actually deeply spooky. It's like M.R. James is meant to be. M.R. James only occasionally I find disquieting. Maybe it's too familiar, the trappings of it. But the black magic stuff in this, in the middle of a book that feels like a fantasy book, when you start getting the plagues from the woman next door and the spooky cats and the snakes and stuff. So it's not exactly cozy, relaxing reading. And I'm halfway through Nicholas Fisk, and this really isn't cozy and relaxing. It's also extremely timely. It's a sequel to Grinny, which is a kind of body-snatching story about kids who realise that grandma has been replaced by some kind of sinister alien being. Now in this, the same sinister alien beings seem to come back. I'm only a third of the way through. I guess I'll find out. But at the centre of this is a kind of celebrity political figure. And she's extremely popular and perfect and smiling all the time and charismatic. And our lead character is this young cub reporter who goes to interview her and is charmed, but there's something at the back of his head and he can't focus on what he's thinking. His sister, Beth, is dead against Lisa Treadgold, who's the celebrity. And she says, why can't you see it? As Lisa kind of holds forth, blandly grinning about her ideas about discipline and vigilantism and quite extremely conservative views, she's a dictator in the making. And it's frightening to read now. Really frightening to read now. Because it's all there. In 1984 or so on, when Fisk publishes this, he's really talking about Thatcherism, I guess. And the people have a living memory of fascism. Grandparents and parents know about the Second World War and about terrible things firsthand. And so that'll be the hope in the book, that they will eventually be able to see that Lisa, this charismatic leader who talks about bringing back hanging and bringing back the birch, will be discredited. She will be seen as just another proto-fascist. I'm not so sure these days that people do have that living memory. You hope they do, and will recognise fascism for what it is. What's scary about this as well is that she starts having an effect, a kind of sinister science fiction effect, on people watching her through the telly. So they become more conservative and pompous and arrogant and censorious. And the bit that I've got to, people are accusing each other of taking God's name in vain and being offended by each other. And that's very interesting as well. It's very telling about the ways in which fascist politics makes ordinary people turn against each other and denounce each other. That's what they do as sideshows, as diversionary tactics. to soften us up. It's all there, of course, as I keep saying these days, it's all there in Orwell's 1984. But Fisk is doing it brilliantly, really brilliantly. He also gets this thing of the celebrity culture. You know, he's writing in the 80s, and maybe it is all there, but he's looking ahead as well, I think, and seeing what we're going to end up with. Maybe we live in a terribly cliched, exaggerated form of the 1980s, in which that's where we're living now, in which all the potential for shite that the 80s had, we are dealing with now. But it does read very. It's a great looking ahead to what we've ended up with. I wonder where this goes with Fisk, what he does after this. I can't remember what comes next, actually. I'll have to look. But he's on to something. As you follow him through his career, he's not very optimistic about the future of our world. Anyway, it's fascinating and a brilliant way of using the science fiction tropes that he's inherited from 50s science fiction. And I guess, I mean, it's true. I looked at the Body Snatchers, and there was stuff in there from the 50s that seems familiar now. The kind of zombie-like compliance of the people who've been nobbled by the fascist force from outside is familiar too. You know, it's the mob, isn't it? It's the mob, the disguise that the mob decides to take, and whether that's a Twitter mob or a people just giving up their own capacity for individual thought and chiming in with a populist opinion. These are all manifestations of the mob, and of course science fiction is very good at conjuring images to suit that. Anyway, as I said, not very comfy, cozy reading, and as I've said before, though, that's what books written for this age group, and I guess they're middle grade books, in that particular era, 70s and 80s, were mind spinning, and they meant to be. They set out to be. They look like escapist fantasy, but of course, they set your mind spinning with all sorts of ideas. And as I said, I grew up with those ideas. I grew up with the idea that it's always good to question authority and ask, who do these people think they are? To ask questions all the time, to never take on received opinions. These are the things that I grew up knowing were healthy opinions. And we had books to tell us that all the time. We had writers who would inspire us to have difficult questions for authority, for the people who have control over our lives. And I do wonder if things have shifted. I think children's fiction pivoted at the point we get Harry Potter, and it ruined the environment, I think, of the world of writing for kids, because it became about, you know, making lots of money and people hunting after the next big thing that was going to sell like that. But I also think there was a deep conservatism in those books that I didn't like at the time. I hated the fact they were about public school and being chosen to go to this special place because you are intrinsically special. I despised all of that, and I think it's led to something in children's fiction which is about impressing posh people or rich people. The punk went out of children's fiction when Harry Potter came in, I think. And the punk element, oops, my battery's going. The punk element is definitely there in Puffins, weirdly. They seem so middle class and sedate, except on the whole, they're not. They are they're things that make you think for yourself. And I wish I'd read these when I was 14, 15. You Remember Me, this Fisk book was out in 84. I could have been reading this I could have been reading, I think about the same year, or 85, 86, Penelope Lively's Uninvited Ghosts, and I wish I had. This is hilarious. I read this yesterday afternoon and evening. They're much more comic stories than I'm used to from her. Yeah, she writes kind of folk horror, really, the ones I've read. Ghosty, archaeological, mythic stories. But these are all kind of funny. The first one about a Martian coming to knock at a kid's house and living with the child and his mother for a while is really funny. It's a kind of very British version of E.T. There's loads of good things in this. A talking grandfather clock that does deals about time with the narrator. There's stories about griffins and princesses and dragons that eat junk, and a house full of ghosts. All of them good and funny. And again, something I wish I'd read at the time. I think I spent too much time reading Doctor Who books. Looking back, reading and rereading. Maybe that did me some good. I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe you do find the books that you need when you read them. And actually, it's not a bad thing to be sitting down for the first time with Nicholas Fisk and going, my God, he saw, the next 40 years so clearly. That essentially signing ourselves up for celebrity culture is a way of sleepwalking into populism and fascism. It's so funny that I've had these here waiting for me. And maybe it's good that I've got a store of Puffins. It's like a kind of survivalist's cave, isn't it? With emergency supplies. Crack open the Puffins. And interesting that actually the Fisk book is about waking up from the fog of compliance and not understanding things and realizing what's going on around you. There's an amazing metafictional twist in that the narrator writes letters to Mr. Fisk, the author, who gives him advice on writing, and the horror when he realizes that Mr. Fisk has been nobbled by the authorities as well and has become quite pompous and conservative. So interesting, so clever. Anyway, that's me in a fog of ideas and my head buzzing with Puffin books. No different to how it was, I suppose, when I was 8 and 9. And first reading C.S. Lewis and Dodie Smith on a warm day like this. Anyway, I hope you're all well and enjoying the summer. And I will see you again soon in the next episode. Goodbye.